leaving the theater in the beginning of chapter 14, Archer runs into a friend, Ned Winsat, a writer and intellectual of sorts, not a gentleman, somebody Archer at least respects, and presumably living a life Archer wouldn't mind leading on his own. He's he's a commoner, if you will, not poor necessarily, but not particularly wealthy. But he is a working journalist, a failed novelist, and has settled into a little bit of a life free of terribly many expectations. And this has to have some allure for what we know about young Mr. Archer. The freedom that this guy has is really quite striking. We are told once again that he is married. Winsett is married, and there's a suggestion that it's not necessarily a real marriage of souls necessarily. It's not necessarily a huge passionate bond there, but it is a marriage, and you can take that as yet another example of a uninspiring example of marriage, but it is one that is at least free of hostility, or it's one that allows Winsett the degree of freedom he does have, and it's very chummy the way that he interacts with Newland. They meet each other in the theater, in the lobby after the play, and he immediately says, "Hey Newland, let's go get a beer." Who doesn't need that in their life every now and then? The next morning, however, Newland, begs off about the beer. He doesn't want to go. And there's a suggestion of, there are questions of class and restrictions that, Winsett just has no idea about, oh my God. Winsett suggests that, if you want, you can just move abroad, move to London or something, and you can do whatever you want there. Doing, I can't do that. A gentleman does not do that. A gentleman just endures, oh God. But the next morning, he packs up and he goes off to work in the morning. Newland is a lawyer. Newland is a lawyer at a big firm in New York, very prosperous, and this is his profession. And the way this is introduced is really quite amusing, and also highlights the kind of performativity again that he is just sort of out there doing without any particular interest or conviction or any skin in the game whatsoever. In old-fashioned legal firms like that of which Mr. Letterblair was the head, and which were mainly engaged in the management of large estates and conservative investments, there were always 2 or 3 young men, fairly well off and without professional ambition, who, for a certain number of hours each day, sat at their desks accomplishing trivial tasks, or simply reading the newspapers. Though it was supposed to be proper for them to have an occupation, the crude fact of money-making was still regarded as derogatory, and the law, being a profession, was accounted a more gentlemanly pursuit than business. But none of these young men had much hope of really advancing in his profession, or any earnest desire to do so, and over many of them the green mold of the perfunctory was already perceptibly spreading. Newland is not inspired by this vision. Newland is presumably one of those young men who is going through the motions, showing up, metaphorically clocking in, and spending time there. But it's not a particularly rigorous way to spend your time, and not particularly challenging or interesting either. Who really wants to have an office to go to where you're just performing a little bureaucratic busy work and then, scanning through the funny pages for the rest of the day? Newland sees this as a kind of a trap. He sees his own vulnerability. In the very next line, it made Archer shiver to think that it might be spreading over him, too. He can feel life the responsibilities of his society, the expectations of his class creeping over him like that green mold, and essentially embalming him. It's an image of it's a death image again, another one of several that we have seen throughout. Remember Olenska's question or remark about New York being like heaven, which is another way of saying that everybody there is dead. Archer sends a note to Olenska asking if he might visit her later that day. It takes 3 days for him to get a response, and when it comes, it's a very short and somewhat troubling note. She says she is visiting the van der Luyden estate in the Hudson Valley. She says, "I wish you were here with us." Little suggestive, little seductive even. Importantly, this is another text. This is a note. This is something he is reading, one that prompts questions, invites interpretation, perhaps misinterpretation. There's a little uncertainty there. It's another example of him trying to make sense of stuff. Another example for the reader that this whole thing is text. This whole story, this whole book is text. But anyway, Archer immediately goes, and he had been invited to go visit friends nearby there. He didn't, before he knew that Olenska was going to be there, and he had said, "Nah, I don't want to go. They're just going to be doing stupid stuff there. I don't want to bother." And he immediately writes back to them and says, I changed my mind. I would love a weekend in the country. And so he goes. Chapter 15 starts with him visiting those same friends, and he spends the whole of a Saturday doing weekend friend visiting stuff, particularly weekend friend visiting stuff for the rich and indolent, more hoi polloi, high society lifestyle stuff for readers to soak up and say, "Oh wow, is this what the fancy people really do? Wow, they act so silly little games and practical jokes and just being very high-spirited in a meaningless, empty way." And he throws himself into that, even while the whole time, considerably, he's got other things going on, other plans, other ambitions. He doesn't particularly want to be there, but he performs for them. He plays the role of the weekend house guest and does everything that is expected of him to do, even, when it's completely insincere, and he's faking it so that he can get through to a moment when he can presumably say, "Well, I understand my cousins, the van der Luydens, have a place just up the road, and I'm going to go visit the old couple, and, because it's only polite." Probably never mentioning that Olenska was there visiting. So, okay. He does. Sunday morning comes, he's up, and he borrows a little horse and buggy and trots up the road in the middle of winter in the Hudson Valley. Nice little imagery, but a little chilly. He is told upon reaching the house that the ladies, Olenska and Madame van der Luyden, have gone to church, and that cousin Henry, the gentleman, has retired after lunch to read the newspaper. I think the Evening Standard. The newspaper out of Boston. He's on vacation, whatever. But this is, it's a little amusing that, reading the newspaper is an afternoon activity. In that the whole afternoon, presumably. There's a little bit of a humorous moment there where where Wharton suggests that the butler or whoever was talking to Archer was rather relieved that Archer did not press to have him go and wake up or disturb, let's say, Mr. van der Leyden. Just let the old guy sit there and nod in and out while reading the newspaper. Another sign of the absolute indolence of this people. But Archer takes off, says, no, don't bother him. He's reading the newspaper, and he goes off to find Olenska and presumably also, Mrs. van der Leyden. But he goes trotting down the road on his little horse and buggy, and son of a gun, there's Olenska coming to him. She is wearing bright red, and you have to imagine this almost cinematically, where it is upstate in the middle of winter, and it's probably a field of white snow blanketing the fields and the forest, and here she is, this blood red image coming at her, and you can see blood red as violent, you can see it as sexual. One way or the other, you have to see it as some sort of passion against the cold, chilly exterior of this estate. And we're told repeatedly about the van der Leyden's estate is that, it is a little chilly, it's a little unwelcoming, it is very stiff and formal, just like the van der Leydens. And so it is not necessarily a comfortable place to be, but even within that environment, she is a symbol of great passion. They have sort of a little bit of an enigmatic discussion. He's sort of pressing her for some answers about, well, why did you leave New York? What's going on here? And little evasive, little dodgy. They see an old cottage on the property, on the van der Leyden's property. It was like the original house there before they built the big house for the formal stuff. And they go inside alone. The suggestions are hanging in the air, and there's a lot of tension, let's say. The two of them are alone. In that privacy, they're really only restricted by their own sense of propriety. The talk becomes a little bit more evocative. You're laughing now, but when you wrote me, you were unhappy, he said. Yes, she paused, but I can't feel unhappy when you're here. It's getting a little saucy, getting a little intimate. This is high melodrama. Yeah, this is the stuff of bodice ripping romance novels. But they don't act. They don't actually get terribly much closer. There's this pitch of tension that is just almost excruciating, but they resist. Neither acts upon their obvious inclinations. And then Beaufort enters. He has followed her up. He has come seeking her out also, under a pretense of whatever, some weak, pale excuse that I don't think even he expects anybody to believe. And this is quite the mood killer. And Archer is rather put out by this. He is very frustrated, and essentially he soon says his goodbyes and heads back to his friends, and then the next morning he's on the train heading back into the city. He's stewing on the interruption. He's frustrated by it. He's kind of envying the brazenness of Beaufort, but he knows he felt something between Olenska and himself in their short time together. He knows she felt something in their time together. Little as he had actually seen of Madame Olenska, he was beginning to think that he could read her face, and if not her face, her voice, and both had betrayed annoyance and even dismay at Beaufort's sudden appearance. He read her face. The emphasis on reading is underscored when he gets back into town. He returns home, finds a delivery of books from London that he had ordered, stuff like Middlemarch, which has just come out. What is this? Well, it got some good reviews. It's another reminder that he has intellectual and cultural tastes, or an intellectual and cultural identity, I think, that puts him somewhat outside the society around him. He is distinct from the other members of his class, independent of New York high society in general because of this. It is a shipment of books from London, specifically. The exact place that his friend Winsett had been telling him, well, maybe you should go move over there. There's this undercurrent that you can break out. But also, very significantly, it is another instance reminding him of reading. And he spends the whole night then reading, going through these books, flipping through them, sometimes unsuccessfully, because he seems to be reading other stuff, reading the reality of his life. And you can see him just sort of like lurching through it. The next couple of days trudge by, and he is frustrated. He feels stultified in his regular routine. The taste of the usual was like cinders in his mouth, and there were moments when he felt as if he were being buried alive under his future. Another reference to conventional life being a kind of death. Another sense that he's just going through this empty performance of life with no sincerity, no commitment, no feeling at all. At the end of the week, he gets a note from Olenska. It is, again, rather enigmatic. Come late tomorrow. I must explain to you. Ellen. These were the only words it contained. And he's a little frustrated by this. At first, he just sort of tucks it away and, okay, compartmentalize, simple, keep it away. And he goes out, he sees a play, he has dinner, just ordinary, ordinary life stuff. It's like, oh yeah, I got a note, what are you going to do? Then he comes home that night and reads it and rereads it many times and dwells upon the different kinds of meanings that he can extract from it. Fancies that he sees some traces of her, it's not her native language, French, but fancies that he can see some traces of French diction and syntax going on there. Not so much diction, but syntax. Some of the rudiments of the language are different than English, and he's starting to see, well, gee, is there something particularly European in the way she speaks, or how can I interpret this note if I understand that? He's trying to break down the language. He's trying to understand the text in front of him. Ding, ding, ding. Come late tomorrow. I must explain to you, Ellen. These were the only words it contained, even dwelling on the fact that there was an absence there, that there is a void that needs to be filled. The incompleteness of it is calling out to him. And he's not sure what to do about that. The next morning, he runs off to join May in St. Augustine. 1 week after impulsively rushing off to find Olenska. What do you make of that?